PTSD 911 is a groundbreaking documentary that should be the gold standard viewing for any rookie training curriculum, administration, aspiring first responders, and the families of those who serve. That's a quote by David Betts, retired police captain of detectives from Chelsea, Massachusetts. He said this recently about the award-winning documentary PTSD 911. So if you want your team to begin talking about wellness, this film should be included in your training curriculum. You can order it today for your agency at ptsd911movie.com/toolkit or click the link in the show notes below. Hey, welcome back to the First Responder Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, Conrad Weaver, and today's episode is one that will stick with you long after it ends. We're joined by Kris O'Neill, a retired police officer from Wisconsin, who takes us deep into the emotional and psychological impact of a deadly shooting he was involved in and the journey it took for him to come back from that moment. It's not just about what happened on duty, it's about what happened after. The silence, the doubt, the invisible wounds that far outlast any headline. And Kris's story is honest, it's raw, and ultimately it's redemptive. So whether you're on the job, you're supporting someone who is, or leading an agency that wants to do better, this conversation is a must listen, so please stay tuned. Hey, if you're a new listener or have been listening to the show for a while, please take a moment to leave us a 5-star rating and a review. This is one of the key ways you can help us grow the show so that more first responders get connected to the people and resources you hear on the program. So whether you listen on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or if you're watching this on YouTube, please let us know what you think of the show and then share it with your tribe. And I'll be ever grateful. And now here's my conversation with Kris O'Neill. Well, Kris O'Neill, welcome to the First Responder Wellness Podcast. I'm so glad we were able to meet a couple of months ago now.
Yeah. Yes. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So you were a police officer up in the Wisconsin area. I want to dive right into your story because you have a really impactful story. So tell me about what happened on January 28th, 2017.
So I was working that day. It was a day shift patrol for me. I was working back on our patrol division at that time. And we had gotten a call that morning, toned out for a man with a gun on the south side of town in Eau Claire. And we had very few officers on the road at the time. And the one officer they did send to that call was in a different area of town, way further north. So I self-dispatched to that, went with two other officers that I was with on a different call. The call came in, it was a man with a gun. He was at a hotel in the city right across from a busy gas station. The reports were that he was pointing the gun at different people in the area and passing cars. They gave a good description of the person. So as I was heading up that direction, dispatch continued to update on information they got from the caller, including a really good clothing description of the person. I was the first one to arrive on the scene. The two other officers that were following me up there peeled off into a different driveway There were two driveways into this hotel, and they took the first one, and I continued on to the second one. And as soon as I pulled into that driveway, the person that was described stepped out from behind a big box truck that was parked in the parking lot there with a gun in his hand. And I parked my car as quickly as I could. I got out, took my squad rifle with me. I had made that ready on my way up to the scene. And the person with the gun started approaching me, raised the gun, pointed it at me, and continued to walk towards me. I gave him multiple commands to drop the gun. He did not do that. The last time I told him to drop the gun, he verbally said, "I will not," and continued walking towards me that whole time. I fired my squad rifle. I hit him, and he went down. He was still holding the gun in his hand when he hit the ground. And again, I was the only person on scene at the time, so I approached just to make sure that we could get the gun away from him. So the situation wouldn't continue. And as I got to him and moved the gun away, basically I was there watching him take his last breath.
Hmm. That is a pretty traumatic scene for anyone, and including people in law enforcement. And what did that do inside your head?
It was difficult for me to process. I knew what the job entailed. I'd been doing the job for quite a while at that point, just shy of 20 years. My dad was a police officer, so I grew up in the environment. When I got into law enforcement, I knew I could do the job. The only thing I had ever questioned was whether I could do this part of the job if it ever happened, and I just wasn't sure. And then when it happened, I really didn't think about it as it was taking place. Just training kicked in, and I did what I needed to do. But after it, when things started to slow down, is when it really started to hit me. I grew up in an Irish Catholic family, went to church every Sunday. Was an altar server, the whole 9 yards. So I grew up with a lot of Catholic guilt, and it was really ingrained in us that we follow the commandments, and the number one of all is thou shalt not kill. And for me, after just having done that, that Catholic guilt kicked in, and I really struggled dealing with that aspect of it, knowing that I had caused the death of this other person. And it was weird because I knew it didn't make sense. He had caused the circumstances that led to this, but I still was struggling with my part in all of it.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, when something like this happens, there's an investigation. There's it can be a long investigation, and I think ultimately you were cleared for this.
Yes.
What did the agency provide for you in support or not following this?
So after this situation, we didn't really have any mandated supports in place. Uh, the agency put me on administrative leave, which was normal. But at the time, it took quite a long time for our DA's office to render an opinion as to the justification of the shooting. So I ended up being on administrative leave for several months. So it dragged out quite a bit. And again, there was no requirement that I see anybody or talk to anybody or get cleared to come back to work. It was you go on your administrative assignment, and once every investigation is done, then you can come back to work. So I really didn't do a whole lot. I remember one of my deputy chiefs coming up and saying, "Hey, if this is a problem, you have EAP," and said, you should use that. Well, I wasn't going to go to EAP because they don't know cops. And I didn't want to have to try to build a whole foundation with somebody so they understood what we did. I did have a coworker at the time who had been involved in an OAS several years before, and he was a real good friend. We started working the same day at the police department, still good friends to this day. He pushed me to go and see somebody and talk through it. Eventually, I did go and talk to somebody. I had maybe 4 or 5 visits with that person, and they were able to get me to a place where I was able to go back to work and continue to do the job.
Mm-hmm. Was your agency, was it kind of a suck it up culture, or was there a culture there of getting help?
It was very much a suck it up culture. From the time I started in 97 until this happened, it was, you don't really talk about it. You just find a way to push down or shelve whatever's going on and get yourself ready to go to the next call. Mm-hmm. And because there was no formal process, it varied for every shooting that happened. There weren't a whole lot over the course of my career up to that point, but they each were handled differently. Some of them were told to go back to work, after the weekend. So they gave me a weekend off and said, come back. Others got more time off. There just wasn't anything really standard with it.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure that interim time when you were waiting on the results of the DA's report, that was probably very stressful for you. So how did you deal with that and a lot of downtime?
it was very stressful because even though I knew that I did what I needed to do, uh, I made a decision in a split second, and I knew somebody was going to be looking at that for a long period of time and analyzing every single thing I did. And I was afraid during that time that they would find something that they would say, no, this isn't okay. And I wouldn't be okay, coming out of it. So it was tough. And because we were still in that culture where we don't talk about it, I didn't feel comfortable talking to people at work. Um, the one person that I did feel comfortable talking to was the one who urged me to see somebody, and he normalized a lot of the things I was feeling. But for me, there was a lot of doubt in my mind as to whether or not I was okay because of the things I was experiencing. Fortunately, my wife and I have a great relationship, and we've been very open with each other through the whole thing. We talked about stuff that's happened at work since the very beginning, and she was there to listen and help me through some of that. But there were things I still didn't tell her because I didn't want to burden her with that either.
Looking back at your career and your journey to this point, what do you wish you would have had? What tools you wish you would have had in your toolbox, in your mental wellness toolbox, to deal with this in a better way?
There's a lot of different things that I see now that we didn't have back then. We have peer support teams that support officers that have gone through that. I now am working in a peer support fashion as well, and I have a lot of contact with people around the state of Wisconsin that have gone through similar things. There's requirements now at the department I worked for to see somebody after a shooting, and it's not just a one-time deal, but they have a pretty rigorous schedule of visits. So you have to see somebody at like 1, 3, 6, 9, and 12 months just to check in and make sure everything's going okay. And there's been a culture shift to wellness in our department, including wellness visits. That I work now for Hakes Wellness Solutions, and they do wellness visits for many, many agencies in this area. So those are some of the things I wish would have been in place that maybe I would have been able to unpack some of what I was dealing with in a better way, and it would have changed the course of the remainder of my career.
Mm-hmm. So what happened with your career following that incident? What was the path that you took?
Well, after that, I just kind of was there. I worked patrol. There wasn't a whole lot expected of me. Was in a car responding to calls, so I did my job. I did it well. I answered my calls for service. My officer initiated workload. I got to a point where I felt like the more work that I do, the more I put myself out there, the more risk I run of being involved in another incident like that. So I didn't go seeking out a lot of extra things to do, but I did what was required of me, and I did it well. And I had for my whole career. I was a good cop. I did my job very well. My career was very promising. I had gotten a lot of transfers, a lot of specialty positions in the job. Um, but after this, it changed my mindset, and I slowed down a bit.
Mm-hmm. What was the mindset that changed for you? Were you not interested so much in the job anymore? Did you think maybe I'm not cut out for this anymore? What was that mindset?
I never doubted whether I was cut out for the job. It's the only thing I ever knew that I really wanted to do. Uh, Growing up in that environment, I watched not only my dad, but all of his friends were cops. So it was just the culture I grew up in, and I knew I could do the job, and I liked the job. But the job was just different. And there was some fear there that this could happen again.
Hmm.
And I knew that what happened had impacted me in a way that changed me personally. And there was some fear that if it happened again, that change would be more drastic, and I didn't want that.
hmm So when you went to see someone following that, after your friend kind of compelled you to do that, were did you receive some like training and teaching on kind of how to handle stress in a different way? Was there some tools that you had then to kind of manage that better?
There wasn't. It was the first person I saw was more of a talk therapy. We talked through what had happened, and then got to a point where she's like, "Okay, well, we've talked this all through. You can go back to work now." And that's what it was. And sometimes they describe it as like putting a band-aid on a bullet hole.
Mm-hmm.
It was enough to cover it up and to get me back to where I needed to be. At that point in my career, my goal was to retire, to make it to retirement, and I knew I had a certain amount of time left and knew that I could do that, and that's what I wanted to do. So I went back
Mm-hmm.
and just continued to try to push through every day.
Mm-hmm. So once you retired, what motivated you to get into what you're doing today?
What motivated me to get into doing what I'm doing today was really uh, working with Holly Hakes after my second incident, and recognizing that there's a need to reach people, to help people. I always wanted to be in the law enforcement realm, and this was a way for me to give something back to that community yet, even though I wasn't going to be in it any longer. I wanted to be able to help other people navigate their career as well so that they wouldn't end up in the place that I ended up
Mm-hmm. So, so you said you ended up in a place that you didn't want to be. What was that place?
in. Well, I developed PTSD
Mm-hmm.
uh, after a second incident, and I was withdrawn. I was not happy. I just wasn't overall doing well, um, and I wasn't heading in a very good direction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that can be really challenging. I know of officers here locally that have gone through similar situations. Well, it's one I'm thinking of where the officer was actually shot, and it pretty much ended this person's career. Um, and the agency didn't do a whole lot to support an officer who was down. What needs to happen within departments and agencies across the country to really help officers like yourself manage these situations, because we hear these shootings all the time? What needs to happen?
Part of it, I think, is it has to be individualized towards that person, whoever's involved. And some people are going to need things that other people don't need. But I think to be able to offer things to everybody and then they can choose what they need, themselves, is helpful. After my first shooting, our chief of police retired and we had a new chief come on, and he was more wellness focused. Um, and he implemented the mandatory visits post shootings, and that I think has been a great help for the people in our department that have been involved since that point. Because just getting them in the chair is the hardest part.
Sure.
For me, I didn't want to go. I didn't feel like I needed to go. I'd been stuffing stuff for 20 years in my career. I figured I could do the same, and I could make it through it. So I didn't want to get in that chair. Uh, After the second one, without having that choice, I knew I was going. It took some of that burden away, and then I didn't feel like there was any sense of weakness for having to go. It was just, okay, this is required, so I'm going to go. And once you get in the chair, you'll get talking.
Hmm.
So
I was going to
that's
say, was that easy to talk once you were there?
it was, and there's a lot of different things that played into that for me too. Holly has had her business here. She's been involved in law enforcement forever. She's married to a cop, so she knew the job already. I knew her from when she was working with the juvenile court system, and meeting her at different things kind of broke down barriers for me to actually kind of get into her chair too. We could pick who we wanted to see, but after mine, knowing her and knowing I had to go, it was an easy choice for me to go there. So it was easier for me to open up after the second one.
Mm-hmm. How important was it for you and for officers, first responders in general, to have someone who understands the culture of the first responder community?
It's extremely important. You don't have to build a foundation with somebody if somebody already understands where you're coming from. And I've heard horror stories from people that have seen people that don't understand the job, and they try to explain all of that, and it's almost like they're causing trauma to the therapist by having to explain to them what cops do and what we see and how it impacts us. So somebody that's already got that base isn't going to need to be primed to listen to a cop. They're already going to know.
Mm-hmm.
And here, the way that our office is set up is very cop friendly. Big chairs so everybody can sit down. You can wear your gun in. There's nothing other than cop stuff in the building. It's very much cop friendly and is designed to be that way, just to kind of set everybody at ease coming in.
Mm-hmm. I heard of a story. Actually, last night I was at an event and I heard someone talking about they sent a cop to this was a virtual therapy session, and they apparently hadn't vetted this therapist, and the cop, being a cop, he had cop stuff on his wall behind him, and the therapist lit into him for being a cop. It was that whole defund the police type mentality.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, that was a bad decision to, find someone like that. How important and how should an agency vet those type of people, therapists who have an interest in working with law enforcement?
One thing that we do here is we try to connect people in different areas of the state with therapists that we know that are cop friendly, that know the job, that want to do that kind of work. And we've been fortunate enough to make a lot of connections throughout the state at different events that we've been at. So we do a lot of referrals to different people because of that. But you have to find those people in your own area. And sometimes it's difficult to do because it's not something a lot of people advertise. But I think we're seeing a trend, at least in our area, that more people want to get into that as a specialty. They don't want to be just a general therapist. They don't want to see everybody or deal with every issue, but they want to be first responder focused. And when you find that, you share it.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's so much of a need in this community for that the word needs to get out.
What should, if there's a therapist like watching this or listening to this, and they have an interest in this, what should they do? What's a good first step for a therapist who wants to get into this population?
Well, I think one thing they can do, and what we encourage for people who are interested, is to learn what cops do, learn the terminology, go on ride-alongs with different agencies just to see how cops do their job before hanging out your shingle and saying, I'm going to see a bunch of cops. Learn the job, learn cops talk different. We have our own, vocabulary, so you have to learn that. So there's that trust then that gets built in right away when you sit down with somebody that knows what you do and you don't have to explain it. You can feel more comfortable talking about that with that person.
Mm-hmm. So what would you say to that cop who's listening? Perhaps they're in their car and it's 2 a.m. and they happened upon this podcast and they've been dealing with some stuff. What would you say to them?
Reach out, get a hold of somebody. Help is there, but you have to seek it out. And one thing I tell a lot of cops that I talk to that say, well, I tried a therapist and it just wasn't for me. It didn't help. I tell people, keep trying. One person isn't perfect for everybody. You'll find a person that can help you. There's plenty out there. So don't give up.
So what brings you joy today in the work that you do?
Uh, for me, I get a lot of joy out of the public speaking I do, sharing my story uh, at different functions to rooms full of cops and having them come up afterwards and say, "Hey, I thought I was alone in this. I was involved in something, and those same things were happening to me, and I thought nobody knew what I was talking about. I was afraid to say anything." Um, I think normalizing feelings is important, and people recognizing uh, that there's a way to offload some of that as you go through your career and to feel better about the job you're doing and make it not just make it to retirement, but make it to retirement more similar to the way that you went into the job.
hmm hmm So, so for you, how important has it been to share your story, and what has that done for you, just mindset wise?
Well, for me, it's added some purpose to the pain that I've gone through, and it allows me to every time I tell my story, it becomes a little less impactful for me. So it's still kind of therapy for me going out and talking about it, but having the ability to give something back to people that are still doing the job and having people tell me that it's helped them, uh, then it seems to be worthwhile. Everything I had to go through seems to be worthwhile. And seeing the change in the trends in law enforcement and wellness, not just from a physical standpoint, but from a mental health standpoint now, makes it worth it.
hmm
Um, and the other thing I do, I train people as peer supporters now, something that I wasn't real familiar with on the job because it wasn't formalized for most of my career. It was, you squat up with somebody and chat about something or go out and have a beer after work and talk through something. That was peer support then. But having formal peer support now and being able to train people to do that, um, it, it just offers a different level of help that we didn't have formalized. And the state of Wisconsin passed a bill recently where communications between peer supporters and the people they support is it's confidential. It's privileged information now, so it can't be compelled to be given. Offers a different level for somebody to come in and help their coworkers out if they're struggling with something and not have to worry about talking about that later. So there's a lot of good things that are happening on that side of uh, peer support, and um, I get some satisfaction in being able to help people get that as well.
hmm Has it been difficult to get agencies kind of to buy into the peer support programs and to get kind of getting that rolling, or how has that been a challenge for you guys?
Most of the agencies that we've dealt with, the administration buys in pretty well.
hmm
There's been a few where there's been a little bit of pushback to it, but I think the hardest people to get to buy into that is the old senior cops that have been around for a long time that are used to that mentality of
Suck it
you
up,
don't
man.
talk
Right?
about it.
Yeah.
Yep, rub some dirt on it, get back in
Yeah.
the game. You
hmm
know, because after a period of time, we get cynical on the job and we think, what's the ulterior motive to all of
hmm
this? And there really isn't one. It's all about helping your coworkers. But once people do start to buy into that and that support goes department wide, it does amazing things for departments.
Have you seen more success with bottom up training or top down training?
They both work. You need to have that top down support to get it rolling, but you really need the bottom up support to get the buy in
hmm
from the people that are doing the job day to day, frontline people. Um, and fortunately, I think with most of the agencies we've worked with, there's a good group of people on the bottom that push that agenda too. and get people to buy in. So both are important.
I've heard from people around the country that sometimes with the younger generation coming in, it's easier to implement some of these things. Have you found that as well?
I have. It's funny because over the course of my career, I was involved in two officer-involved shootings and had to do um, debriefings after both of them. And the first one was the old school, sit in a circle, talk about what happened. And the second one, it was much bigger. They had everybody that had even touched the case at all in that debriefing, and there were a lot of younger people in that briefing. We had, I think, 4 or 5 officers that were still in field training that had showed up on the scene with their training officers and observed what was going on, and they were the first ones to start talking when we got to that debrief. And they had all sorts of questions, and they wanted to talk about how things made them feel, what impacted them. And the amazing thing about that was these young people got the conversation going, and the more they talked, the more the older people in the room started to fill in some of the blanks for the younger people and help them to understand the different aspects of what happened. So I think, there's different kinds of support. The old guys are still, we'll squat up and talk. The younger people are, hey, let's talk this through and talk about how it impacted them or what they were feeling. And that gets a conversation started that, wouldn't have happened years ago.
Mm-hmm. In the National FOP and their surveys have found that, the top 2 stressors for law enforcement specifically is, comes from the organization. Have you seen that, and what needs to be done to help mitigate some of that?
Yeah, there are a lot of things that organizationally add up, and that causes just as much stress as the other things. And I don't know what the correct answer is to how to mitigate that, because it's always something different. After 25 years on the job, I went through, times where the stress was because pay wasn't good and the hours weren't right, or we were working too many weekends, or then, you've had 2020 with the COVID lockdowns and all of those changes that added a lot of different kinds of stress. And then, with the protests that happened around that same time, it added a different level of stress. And there's always so many things that just kind of pick away at you on this job. It's we used to call it the death by 1,000 cuts. It's not the one big thing that's going to get you. It's all the little things that add up. And I don't know what the right way is to mitigate all of that, but I think talking through it and unloading some of that as you go helps you to have the capacity to deal with more things as they come in. If I was able to offload some of the stuff I dealt with early in my career, I might have had more capacity to deal with some of those things that just kind of picked away at you over time. And I think that's one of the benefits of an annual wellness visit is you get to talk to somebody outside the organization about those things and work through them. And if during that conversation you recognize that, hey, there's more to this that I really need to unpack, that opens up that opportunity then to schedule a session and deal with those things that are bothering you.
Mm-hmm. I know here in the state of Maryland, they've recently, I think last year, they implemented a mandatory wellness visit every year for law enforcement. So how do you keep that from becoming just a check the box type of thing?
It's tough because you have to get the buy-in. And we've had agencies that have had certain members just outright refuse to participate because I think in certain agencies there's a culture that if you talk about stuff, it's going to hurt you. And when I hear those stories, I think, what has the culture in that agency been? What's happened to somebody there that has led to an issue? It doesn't come out of nowhere. So that we have had that, but we've also experienced the other where people are very willing to come in and open about it because they recognize that there can be some help. Unfortunately, some of those agencies have suffered losses with officers to suicide, or they've had line of duty deaths, and those have pushed those agencies to implement those, and I think the buy-in comes pretty quickly with that. When people, especially officer suicides, they recognize that, Jesus, if we could have done something ahead of time, we might have been able to help this person before it got too bad. So I think that buy-in is a little quicker, but eventually, I think it's the same as those after incident sessions that you have to have. Once you sit down, chances are you're going to talk, and most of the agencies that we serve mandate that one visit a year. Others, it's voluntary, but we do see a lot of people from those agencies where it's voluntary that come in and do it because they recognize the benefit of it.
Do you see people that once they come in for their mandated one, do they come back for like just a visit outside of the mandate?
Yeah, there is a lot of repeat visits after that, and that proves to me that it's working. We don't often sit down and assess where we're at mentally, physically, spiritually, in any way. We just kind of go on with our lives day to day. But when we have to actually sit down and think about how we're feeling, or how is this job that we're doing impacting us, that's when I think things kind of bubble up, and we recognize it, and then we say, geez, now I can deal with this. And I think offloading some of that stuff gives you the capacity to deal with the other stuff.
It's kind of like having, you guys in law enforcement, you train, ad nauseum with some of your things. You have annual, firearms training. You have all the stuff, all the tools that you need to do your job. And so often the checkup from the neck up is forgotten, right? Is like, but that's one of the most important parts of your human being.
Right. And that's probably the most important tool that any cop has, is their brain. Every situation you're in, you've got to think through what you're going to do. And if you're not if you're not thinking about the job, if your mind is elsewhere, or you just don't have the capacity to think through that, you're not going to do well, and you're more likely to get hurt. And I think it's probably the most important tool to keep in shape.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So tell me about Hakes Wellness Solutions, kind of where you guys are at and how people can reach out if they're in the Wisconsin area.
So we're in the Chippewa Falls area. Hakes Wellness Solutions was started in 2021. Holly Hakes started the business with her husband after he retired as a law enforcement officer. Currently, we have Holly is the lead here, and then there's two other therapists that work here, Michelle and Ellen. They see patients all week, Monday through Friday, and it's only first responders, cops, jailers, all of those things that fit under that first responder category. There's an office here in Chippewa Falls, and then she also has an office in Wausau, Wisconsin. Holly has a website set up. It's HakesWellnessSolutions.com. If you navigate to that website, numbers are on there, as well as email addresses that you can get a hold of someone here.
And so how can people get a hold of you if they want to bring you to an event to speak or to share?
Well, you can send me an email. My email is Kris, it's Kris, at HakesWellnessSolutions.com, and reach out. We'll get something scheduled.
Yeah. Awesome. Kris, so final word to you, what would you say to those first responders out there who are in the job? What would you say to them as a word of encouragement?
My advice is just use the resources that are available to you. If you have wellness visits available to you, use them. If they're mandatory, you have to. If they're not, take advantage of it. See somebody if you're not doing well. Do a good self-assessment and try to see where you're at. If you've gotten angry, if you've gotten crabby, if you've gotten short, if everything about the job is starting to bother you, it's time to check in and try to get back to where you were before. And that can happen. For me, after a 25-year career, the last few years were very difficult, and I was able to turn it around after leaving with a lot of help and get to a point where I'm happy again. I'm enjoying life. I'm loving what I'm doing. I'm a different person for my family. There was times during my career where I'd come home from work and I'd be able to tolerate people for about a half an hour, and then I'd disappear. And that's not the case anymore. So I encourage you to use whatever resources are available to you to try to get better, because it can change, and it does change, and life can be everything you want it to be.
Well, we'll leave it at that. Kris, thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for being on the program today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for sticking around and listening today, and thanks for sharing this episode with your tribe. And be sure to tune in next Wednesday for another powerful conversation. Next week, I'll have a retired officer from the NYPD on the show to tell us her story. So please remember, you are not alone. If you need someone to talk to and don't know where you can turn, you can dial 988 for help. Until next time, be well, take care of yourself and those around you, and go out and do something great in the world.